Imagine a food plant that breaks the rules of modern agriculture. You don't replant it every year. You don't buy seeds again and again. You put it in the ground once, and it keeps coming back, quietly multiplying beneath your feet, even when the weather turns harsh. In a true homesteading world, that sounds like a miracle. In an industrial farming world, it can look like a problem. Modern food systems are built around control. Uniform harvests. Predictable storage. Clean supply chains. Crops that fit machines, markets, and schedules. But some plants don't play along. They grow when they want. They spread underground. They refuse to be neat. And that's why so many of them get pushed to the edges of our memory, rebranded as weeds, ignored as old-fashioned, or dismissed as not worth the trouble. Today's story is about one of those plants. A perennial tuber that can feed a family for years with almost no effort once established. A crop that survives cold winters, tolerates rough seasons, and stores energy underground like a living pantry. You might have seen it before. Yellow flowers waving by roadsides. A patch growing wild near an empty lot. And you never realized what it was. In the next few minutes, you're going to learn 3 things. First, why this kind of plant was once treated like an insurance policy against hunger, especially for people who lived close to the land. Second, how it spread across continents, fed communities through hard times, and then slowly disappeared from everyday diets. And third, why it's quietly coming back right now, as more people look for resilient crops, low-input gardens, and practical food security at home. This isn't about fantasy survival. It's about simple biology and forgotten practicality. A plant that stores its harvest underground, protects itself from storms and frost, and keeps reproducing even if you walk away. So if you've ever wanted a plant once harvest for years crop, something that fits real homesteading and real-world uncertainty, stay with me. By the end, you'll know what it is, why you don't hear about it more often, and how people are using it again, right now. If this kind of homesteading story feels useful, type OK in the comments so I know to make more like it. Samuel de Champlain did not set out to change homesteading. In the early 1600s, he was mapping the coasts of North America, learning the rivers, the seasons, and the people who already knew how to live there. One day he was offered a meal that looked simple. Roasted tubers, earthy and sweet, pulled from the ground like buried food storage. To the people who served it, this was not a curiosity. It was reliability. A crop that did not demand constant replanting because it was built for survival, not convenience. Here is the detail modern gardens forget. Annual crops make you start over every year. A perennial tuber stores the harvest underground, protected from frost, storms, and dry spells. Even when the surface looks quiet, the pantry is still there. Champlain carried samples back across the Atlantic. In Europe, the plant spread quickly, not because it was elegant, but because it was practical. It could handle rough soils, survive cold winters, and produce real food in a small space. For families living close to hunger, that mattered more than perfect shapes or easy harvest. Over time, it picked up confusing names. Jerusalem artichoke, even though it has nothing to do with Jerusalem and it is not an artichoke. Some called it sunchoke. Others called it sunroot. The names changed, but the biology stayed the same. A tough perennial that quietly multiplies underground. And this is where the story turns. When something grows too well, society does not always celebrate it. The same trait that makes a crop perfect for homesteading can make it inconvenient for systems that demand neat rows and predictable harvests. So remember this pattern. First, it feeds people reliably. Then it spreads. Then it becomes common. And once it becomes common, the question changes. Not can this feed us, but can we control it? Next, we follow what happened when this crop became both useful and inconvenient, and why it began slipping out of everyday diets even after proving it could keep people alive. When you hear the phrase survival crop, most people picture something dramatic. A bunker. A stockpile. A crisis. But for communities who faced uncertainty every winter, survival looked quieter. It looked like food that stayed in the ground, waiting. That is what made this perennial tuber so powerful. It was not only something you harvested. It was something you could return to. If storms ruined the surface garden, the underground pantry could still be there. If you needed food in the hardest month of the year, you did not need a warehouse. You needed a shovel. Across many indigenous farming and foraging traditions, the logic was simple. Plant a small patch. Harvest what you need. Leave enough behind. The plant multiplies on its own. Over time, one planting becomes a living reserve. A reliable source of calories that does not demand constant attention. Later, as settlers moved into unfamiliar landscapes, they repeatedly depended on local knowledge to find food when the surface looked empty. When you do not know the land, you learn quickly that the most dependable harvest is not always visible. Sometimes the safest food is underground. This is also why the plant spread so easily once people recognized its value. It did not require perfect soil. It tolerated rough seasons. It could produce a meaningful harvest from a small space. For homesteading, those traits are gold. You are not just growing a vegetable. You are building resilience. But there is a trade-off hidden inside that resilience. A plant that survives without you is a plant you do not fully control. It can spread beyond its boundaries. It can return when you thought it was gone. It can become difficult to manage in a system that expects tidy rows and clean harvests. So people began holding two truths at once. This crop could keep you alive through hard years. And it could become inconvenient when life demanded order and efficiency. Next, that tension becomes the turning point. Because one crop rose to dominate modern tables not only because it fed people, but because it could be standardized, harvested, stored, and traded at scale. And that is when the perennial pantry began to fade from everyday diets. Quick check-in. If you would plant a crop that comes back every year, comment yes. And this is where the modern table was decided. When agriculture became industrial, the question changed from what can feed us to what can be standardized. A crop did not just need to grow well. It needed to fit machines, storage, transport, and profit. That is where the perennial tuber began to lose ground. Its harvest is irregular. The tubers grow in strange, knobby shapes. They cling to the soil. They do not line up neatly for mechanical harvest. Cleaning takes more time. Sorting takes more labor. And in a system built for speed, small inconveniences become deal breakers. Storage was another turning point. This crop can be kept in the ground for a long time, but once harvested, it does not behave like a perfect warehouse commodity. It can dry out, bruise easily, and spoil faster than the crops that were designed around long storage and shipping. For large markets, that matters. Then there is the problem of uniformity. Industrial food systems prefer one predictable product. One size. One shape. One shelf life. But perennial tubers do not deliver that kind of consistency. They deliver resilience, not uniformity. And right beside it was a competitor that fit the new world perfectly. A crop that could be planted in rows, harvested in bulk, stored for months, shipped long distances, and sold in standardized forms. Potatoes did not win because they were more natural. They won because they were easier to control. So gradually, the perennial pantry was pushed out of the mainstream. Not because it stopped being useful, but because usefulness was redefined. Farming stopped being only about surviving winter. It became a system of logistics, scale, and predictable trade. But something interesting happens when the world shifts again. When weather becomes less predictable, when people want low-input gardens, when food security feels personal, the old definition of useful begins to return. Next, we follow how this crop came back during the hardest years, and why it left a complicated memory behind. Then the world broke open. Twice. When war and disruption hit Europe, the neat logic of modern agriculture collapsed. Supply lines snapped. Fields were lost. Storage was rationed. And the crops that looked perfect on paper suddenly became fragile in real life. In those years, this perennial tuber returned, not as a trendy food, but as a quiet lifeline. It could grow in places that were overlooked. It could survive cold. And it could wait underground, hidden from shortages and chaos. When other foods disappeared, people dug. When markets failed, the pantry was still there. But survival foods carry a cost. They become attached to memory. For many families, this crop was the taste of hard winters and empty shelves. It was the meal eaten when there was nothing else. It filled stomachs, but it also reminded people of fear, loss, and exhaustion. And after the wars, when life finally began to feel stable again, many people wanted distance from anything that smelled like scarcity. So the crop was pushed away, not because it stopped being useful, but because people did not want to remember why they needed it. It became a food of desperation. A symbol of the years everyone wanted to forget. And that is how a plant can vanish without being banned, outlawed, or destroyed. It disappears through emotion. Through relief. Through the desire to move on. Next, we follow what happened when the wars ended, the potato took over the table, and this perennial pantry became a niche again. And now we reach the modern paradox. The crop never disappeared from the earth. It disappeared from the system. For decades it survived on the margins. In backyard patches. Along fence lines. In forgotten corners where no one bothered to remove it. And then, quietly, it began to return, carried by chefs, gardeners, and homesteaders who were no longer asking for perfect uniformity. They were asking for resilience. This is where nutrition enters the story. This tuber stores much of its energy as inulin, a type of fiber that many people associate with prebiotic foods. Some studies suggest it can support the gut microbiome by feeding beneficial bacteria. That does not make it a miracle cure. But it does explain why, in a world obsessed with gut health, this forgotten crop suddenly feels relevant again. There is also the gardening side. As a perennial, it can grow with fewer inputs than many annual crops. It can fit into low-maintenance garden systems. It can be part of a food forest plan. And in a time when drought, heat, and unpredictable seasons are becoming normal, hardy crops start to look less like old habits and more like smart insurance. But the return comes with a warning. This plant is powerful. It spreads underground. If you plant it without a boundary, it can take over a bed. So modern growers have learned a simple rule. Contain it. Plant it where you can manage it. Treat it like a reliable tool, not a decorative plant. Next, we bring everything together. How to grow it without losing control, how to harvest and store it, and how to make it part of real homesteading, not just an interesting story. One word only. Would you try this crop at home? Comment try. So how do you actually use this crop for real homesteading without letting it take over your garden? Start with containment. The simplest method is to plant it in a raised bed with solid borders or in large containers. Give it space, but do not give it freedom to spread into the rest of your yard. Think of it like a living pantry you keep in one safe corner. Plant the tubers in early spring or in fall where winters are not extreme. Bury them a few inches deep, water once to settle the soil, and then let the plant do what it was designed to do. In many climates it needs less attention than annual crops once established. Harvest is flexible. You can dig some tubers in late fall, and you can also leave the rest in the ground and harvest through winter as needed, because cold soil helps keep them firm. That is one of the reasons it works so well as a survival crop. For storage, treat it like a root crop. Keep it cool and humid, and do not let it dry out. If you have a root cellar, that is ideal. If not, a breathable bag in the refrigerator crisper can work. And here is the final key. Always leave a few small tubers behind. That is how the patch renews itself. Plant once, harvest for years, and keep your pantry growing underground. So here is the real lesson. Some of the most reliable foods are not the ones built for perfect markets. They are built for imperfect years. This perennial pantry was never truly gone. It was simply pushed aside by a system that rewards uniformity over resilience. But when weather becomes unpredictable, when budgets tighten, and when food security feels personal, the old skills return. Plant once. Harvest what you need. Store what you can. Leave enough behind so the patch renews itself. If you want to try it, start small, keep it contained, and treat it like a tool for homesteading, not a trend. And if this kind of forgotten crop story helps you, subscribe for the next one, because there are more living pantries hiding in plain sight. If you want more forgotten crops and real homesteading skills like this, subscribe now and join us for the next story.